Welcome everyone to this session. It is a little bit different than the other sessions that we've had. For one, this will be a live podcast recording for Quantum's podcast, The Circular Future. Today, we're unpacking lessons learned from Rogers Communications and Quantum Lifecycle Partners' vendor relationship, particularly as the relationship evolved from recycling telecom scrap to responding to sustainability outcomes in their vendor contracts. With me is Wayne Proulx, Senior Manager, Sustainable Engagement and Outreach at Rogers Communications. Wayne's real estate and climate management career spans over 40 years. He is currently responsible to ensure Rogers' net zero commitment. Clayton Miller is Vice President, Business Development of Recycling at Quantum Lifecycle Partners. Clayton has been recycling electronics for over 20 years, having had progressively senior roles at a total of 4 different electronics recyclers. I love it. I love doing this live. There's so much energy, and thank you for doing this, and welcome to the podcast. Now, I want to get into sustainability outcomes, challenges, and solutions, but first I want to start with a fun question. Wayne, what would you say would be 3 things that we wouldn't necessarily know about Rogers Communications?
Well, thank you, Stephanie, and thanks, Quantum, for having me here today, and as well as thank you for being in our live podcast. This is pretty exciting stuff, if not nervous. Rogers is run by Edward Rogers. That's nothing new, and an amazing board. But I think, on the sustainability front, and if you read our ESG report and our reports that came out for last year, 2022, little over 2.5 or 3 years ago, we created an ESG committee of the board. As we all know, it's a lot easier for rain to fall than it is to push water uphill. So we established that because we had an objective in mind, and that objective was to become committed to the SBTI, the Science-Based Targeting Initiative, which we've done. I'll talk about that in a moment. But what we also realized is that it takes a lot of people at numerous levels within the company to make that happen. So reporting to that ESG committee directly is a climate change steering committee, and that's made up of a series of executives and of VPs and higher. And then on the other side, we have an energy executive committee or council. Reporting to that energy council, we've got an energy ops team, which actually, create those opportunities and work with those opportunities. And then from the steering committee, climate change steering committee, we've got a climate change working group. So those 2 lower groups are made up of directors and senior managers like myself, and they report up into those other 2 more executive level, and that goes to the board. So anything we want to do goes through that flow up to the board. That ESG board committee is chaired by Martha Rogers. So we're right into, and it's made up of directors. So it's, plugged right into the board. Edward Rogers knows, from that board committee exactly what we want to do. Having said all that, it's taken us 2 years to work through all the processes to make a commitment December 30th of 2022 to the Science-Based Targeting Initiative. Very, very high level. We were the first, sorry for Bell and Rogers and Cogeco that might be here, partners, we were the first national telecom to commit to not only an interim target of 50% reduction in our emissions by 2030, but also to go net zero by 2050. Another large piece of that, which fits into what we're speaking of today, is that we've also committed to engaging with at least 50% of our suppliers on sustainability, trying to encourage them to set their own targets, science-based or otherwise, but to have that measurement and targeting done. So those are all 3 things.
Amazing. And fun fact, actually, I got my career started at Rogers back when I was a student many years ago, and I was hired onto an asset recovery project, and for 8 months I literally drove around a red Rogers van wearing steel-toed boots and physically pulling out the old equipment from the network sites. So very interesting, and I love the high-level engagement from the leadership.
And we let you go. All right.
Okay, Clayton, over to you. What would be 3 things that we wouldn't necessarily know about Quantum Lifecycle Partners?
Yeah, so Quantum started as an electronics recycler, and we like to say that we handle anything with a battery or a plug. But historically, and Quantum, through various iterations, has about 30 years of corporate history. We used to think of ourselves as scrappers, as scrap metal handlers. And in fact, Quantum now, 50% of our company does reuse and refurbishment, including mobile devices, CPE, and a whole bunch of other things. Again, reusing almost everything with a battery or a plug. So while we started as a recycling play, we're now very much just a technology reuse and recycling play. I think a lot of people are surprised to hear that. As the VP of Recycling Biz Dev, I start most conversations with a series of comments around how we'd rather not recycle the devices at all. We'd rather reuse them. So a lot of people find that interesting. Also, Quantum is the largest in Canada, national in scope. We have 9 facilities across the country and 1 in Costa Rica. I'm still trying to score a position down there, but anyway.
It's true, everyone wants to work in Costa Rica. Okay, let's get into this. So before we get into the actual sustainability outcomes that Rogers is expecting of its suppliers, I want to understand, first of all, a layer below that. What or who is really driving the conversation around sustainability outcomes at Rogers, really?
Yes. Well, as I said, what we made sure we did is, so we have a group called the Energy and Sustainability Team, of which I'm part. We have an energy piece and we have the climate change sustainability piece. We work cross-functionally with all the different business units in the country. Because we've had these committees and at the board level for the last several years, all the ELT executive leadership team are understanding of what the commitment is by Rogers. So that's flowed down through to their ops team, from the wireless teams to the media teams to the IoT teams. It's flown all the way down. So they have an understanding of what we want to do. Our integration with them has been literally a labor of love. We understand the importance of it. They now understand the importance of it. Like any business unit, they're driven by their revenue. They're driven by their business determination. And what we're saying to them is that's got to be based on some of the sustainability things that we want to do and the company wants to do. So we, as I say, are key drivers. Our team really derives this process, frankly, into the company. But the reality is we get a lot of calls, I'm talking daily, from different business units saying, come and help us, we want to do this, is this something we should be doing and working? So it's really become a collaborative, cross-functional effort, which includes our corporate real estate team as well. So.
And what are some of the sustainability KPIs or key performance indicators that you do expect from suppliers these days?
Well, Clayton's team can only know so well. We set expectations for our client. I mean, we have about 40 to 50 different contacts or connections that I do on an annual basis and an ongoing basis with our teams to drive our expectations. Pardon me, we set expectations for, device recycling as an example. We want to recycle everything. That's our KPI. We want to get back as much product as we can from either something we've used in network equipment or from our customers and our clients to bring that materials back to us to have those properly recycled. The biggest negative effect, I think, that Rogers has on the environment, as well as the other telecoms, besides our energy consumption, is putting product into the marketplace. We have an obligation to get that back. And so the KPIs for our suppliers is, what do you do? What products are we buying from you? How is it sustainable? Is it repairable? What is it that you do to help us achieve our objectives? And our supply chain and procurement team are very much integrated in what we want to try and do in that respect.
Now, Clayton, Quantum works with all the major telecom companies in Canada. Are you seeing that it's the same requests from across the board at the different telecom companies, or are the requests different?
Yeah, I think there's a theme to the requests, and that's what's universally true across all of our telecom customers, and for that matter, across all of our enterprise customers as well, around sustainability. So how the implementation of the question is a little bit different, and the ask is a little bit different. But in general, I would say that most of our customers at the enterprise level and at the telecom level used to come to us with a requirement that the product get handled responsibly, but above all else, data security was the prime objective of why they would bring it to a Quantum who may not be the most cost competitive, but is the most certified and so on. That conversation has evolved quickly, where even just a couple years ago, data security was still the prime directive. It still is, very much so, but now what's being layered on top of that is the carbon impacts of the service, and ultimately the ESG aspects of the service, and the value creation aspects of the service. So companies used to be willing to sacrifice value, like dollar value, in exchange for data security. They're not willing to sacrifice on data security. That hasn't changed, but they're also not willing to sacrifice on value. So our services have gotten more sophisticated, where my prime answer used to be, let's destroy the hard drives completely through a hard drive shredding mechanism. Now it's, we can logically wipe the drives, logically being a software solution for wiping the drives, so that we can retain the value of the hard drive itself and ultimately return that value to our customers. So that's kind of how the question has evolved.
Now, I want to get into some of the challenges that, working together in partnership that have risen to the top. It's normal that, in any kind of relationship, we'd love to assume everything is smooth sailing, but it may not always be. And I want to start with you. What would you say have been some challenges that Quantum, or maybe it's the suppliers, have faced in being asked these questions around sustainability outcomes? And they smile at each other.
Yeah.
I love it.
Well, sometimes we get brought into a conversation late in the game, and that can make it challenging. I wouldn't say, we don't really get too many unreasonable requests from our customers. It's mostly just around, we get thought of later in the process than I would like, because we often have a lot of value to bring to a given project, whether it's we're pulling a bunch of devices from the market, or there's some sort of next gen technology that's coming online, so we're going to be refreshing the old network equipment. We get brought in once the equipment typically is sitting on docks and that kind of thing, and has already been removed. And our customers miss out on the opportunities to add efficiency into the retirement process, from the point of it being unplugged and ultimately to the point where it gets to us. There's a lot of different handling steps in there. And sometimes we're asked to make things happen where if we were just brought in sooner, we could have made those things happen, but at this stage of the game, it can become a bit challenging. I'd say the biggest challenge is that we are often, because of the nature of what we do, which is we're bringing a device in, we need to handle it in a certain way, but ultimately we're also being challenged on the side to try and inject value into the process as much as possible. We're often coming up against company policies that were written and implemented with, say, security in mind, that didn't fully take into account the sustainability requirements that the business now has, or the value requirements that the business now has. So we're often pushing back on their own policies to say, hey, our contract says we need to destroy this, but by the way, I can destroy the data securely, return the value to you. Is that okay? And that's not always an easy answer for the customer. Sometimes they need to go back internally and figure some stuff out. So that would be, I think, kind of where we play, is in the gray areas where we're pushing to the customer to say, hey, we can do better if you let us.
And what about from your side, Wayne, sitting across the table? What have been some of the challenges that you've seen?
Our supply chain procurement management team have done an incredible job interacting with all of our supply chain. Our team on the energy and sustainability file, we deal with a certain number of individuals and companies, and we're really driving that whole circular economy, from everything from office waste, construction waste, to electronic waste. I think the challenge from our point of view has been, getting to your point, understanding that these individuals, supply chain individuals, should be at the table sooner than that, making sure that's understood by the business units that are, consuming or buying or distributing the materials. That's always going to be, I think, a challenge. But one of the things that has occurred over the last several months, and I think there's some of my competitive colleagues in the room, through an association called a CBSR, the four largest telecom companies in the country, Canada, Bell, TELUS, Cogeco, and ourselves, have brought together a task force to say, how do we interact with the supply chain to make them aware of what our expectations are, how are we going to communicate with them properly? We do it one-offs. We do it with our QBRs, our quarterly business reviews. So we do that individually. But as a telecom industry, are we being fair to those suppliers by throwing these demands at them? I think the consensus was probably not. So we've got to get to their supply chain on that level. As I said, our procurement supply chain team are all over this with us as well. But I think that's the biggest challenge, that internal understanding is to your point, Clayton, when do you get the supply chain involved and why, right?
Now, there's been a huge change, I'm sure, in your world in the last year with the merger acquisition of Shaw. How has that impacted the supply chain for you, and especially looking at it from the lens of ESG, environmental social governance?
I can really only speak from a sustainability file, from the environmental file, what I deal with. The obviously challenge, any M&A is going to come with these challenges. I've been through a few of them. Is where's the mapping of the expectations of Rogers in terms of what we want to report, what electronics we want to make sure is recycled in the volumes and whatnot. And when Shaw came in, of course, it was new people, new parts of the country, frankly, for the majority of it. How do we, that mapping of expectations in terms of what products that they, where do we get that information from? Who do they recycle? Now, we were very, very lucky because Quantum did all their business as well. So that was very fortunate for us. And we have other similar suppliers, which has been great. But there really has been about the challenge when you bring two groups together like this, is mapping our expectations from a sustainability file with the Shaw, or Shaw Legacy, or as we like to refer to them as, Rogers West.
Rogers West. Now, let's talk about some solutions. I'm hearing one being a sort of plan early where possible, and another big thing to deal with, especially at Rogers. It's a very large organization. You've mentioned there's different departments and different levels. Really, some complexities. Mm-hmm. So, how do we get alignment? Wayne, how have you gotten alignment at Rogers to do this work and to really work with suppliers as well?
Well, I go back to the structure we built on climate change. Excuse me, guys. One of the things that, and it's been a lot longer than this, the last couple of years in my 8 years there, but it really has been about, bringing that alignment to, or bringing the understanding of sustainability, bringing the understanding of climate change, bringing the understanding of, the circular economy to all the different BUs, business units that we have internally. And I think we've been very successful at that, and it's growing daily. But those committees that I mentioned that we established, the Energy Executive Committee and the Climate Change Steering Council has been very effective at communicating, our expectations, their wants and needs. Again, it's about their department, but again, if we're the footing on which they're basing their future business on, that's really where we want to be.
And what about at Quantum, Clayton? How has Quantum done things so that we're working in alignment with companies like Rogers?
Yeah, so one of our core values is this concept of relentless curiosity. We're always asking why questions. And, using the last 12 months as an example through the Rogers and the Shaw merger, as you mentioned, we supported both companies pre-merger, and essentially did the same work for both of them, but with very different KPIs and metrics in mind. They measure different things, frankly. And so, through the last year, a lot of this has been around asking a lot of why questions, and a lot of confirming questions around, okay, this team used to value this. These are the things that were important to them. Are those things still important? No. Okay, under this new mandate, these are the things that are more important now. So shifting our service and what we tell our customers towards messaging that is more current and more relevant, frankly. But also just asking the why question often. And pushing back to say, you've told us to do this, we'd just like to understand why. Because it actually seems to be in contradiction of another direction that we received from a different department within your company. Because we're often working with 6 to 10 different departments and divisions, delivering different service offerings, and we roll all that up into fancy reports that get generated monthly and quarterly for Wayne's team. But the individual departments are often unaware of the direct day-to-day. So we see our role as partly to say, hey, just so you know, there's another department in your business that's doing this. maybe you should go talk to them. And ultimately creating alignment even internally at Rogers from an external perspective.
So it sounds like communication really
Yeah.
is key. From your side, as a supplier, what are your tips in terms of the cadence of communication? You know, how often, like in person versus virtual, what are you seeing these days? What is Quantum doing?
His team can't get rid of us.
Yeah. Wayne would have us call him every day. But in seriousness, though, we at least quarterly, I would say, like that's the absolute bare minimum. But we have a bi-weekly touch point with a key individual at Rogers who manages the actual movement of materials. So he works with Wayne's team, but is in supply chain, and ultimately. So we're meeting with them bi-weekly. We also just have an open policy of everyone that we work with at Rogers knows who they need to talk to depending on what the question is, and we've kind of made that really clear. We've developed, rather than having a single account manager or relationship manager, we have a team that we call our telecom working group that essentially supports all our telecom customers as a team. So we have a group, rather than one subject matter experts, we have a group of subject matter experts that are all able to step in wherever needed to solve whatever problem needs to be solved.
Amazing. And from your side, Wayne, looking at your suppliers and some of those best practices that you're seeing and that you're encouraging, what would your tips be to vendors on how to proactively work with you so that it's in service of your relationship, but specifically also the sustainability outcomes?
Yes. No, I mirror frankly what you said and what Clayton just said, but it really is about reaching out to your customers and saying, look, making sure we're aware of any new technologies, any new process, anything new that's going to affect us, and frankly, any new legislation that we need to be aware of. If we miss something, for example, Quantum is very, very close to all the legislation in terms of reporting across the country. It's very important that we understand those nuances and how things are starting to change if they haven't changed. Like the Triple E legislation in Ontario, is it going to Alberta? Is it going to spread across the country? If so, let's be ready for that. So it really is about, don't wait for us to call you. I managed suppliers for most of my career, and suppliers go, oh God, he's calling. Let it be something more than that. Let it be a call where you call your client and say, hey, just to let you know, one touch base. And the other thing is very important too, and we do it as well, is we don't have only one point of contact for our suppliers, and from our sustainability point, from our team, but we have multiples of them. So there's always that continuity. If somebody's away that day, someone's on vacation, balls don't get dropped. So it really is about that touch point.
Yeah, the touch points. I'm also hearing, really, as suppliers, stepping into your role as really subject matter experts in your zone of genius.
Totally.
Looking ahead, you mentioned about new regulations, possibly new standards coming out. What do you think that suppliers should be prepared for in terms of this whole realm of sustainability? Where is this space going?
All suppliers have to know the expectations that are on us. For sustainability in terms of, we have the Scope 1 emissions, Scope 2 emissions. Scope 3 emissions are all that other stuff that's not energy related, and we recognize that. And a large part of that, and that could be 90% of our overall emissions. Right now it's not regulated, it's going to be regulated. We see that regulation coming. Supply chain is going to be a big part of the connectivity on sustainability. We're going to expect certain things from our supply chain on sustainability, whether it's be setting their own targets or at least measuring their emissions, so that when someone says, Wayne, what are your Scope 3 emissions? We have an answer. How do we get that? The only way we can get that is to our suppliers and working with our suppliers. So it's really going to be the driving expectation from us to our supply chain. That supply chain have to be ready for it. It's coming.
It's true, it is coming. And we've started to get asked about what the specific emissions are from recycling and reusing and remarketing product as it relates to a specific company like Rogers. Clayton, what is Quantum doing to be prepared for this future that we're living into?
Well, you know all about what we're doing to be prepared, but
I asked you.
yes, you did. We have already launched. It's probably about a year old now, and it's being tweaked all the time. But we have a carbon impact report that we can now generate on the fly for any one of our customers. It shows them, given a given time period, the amount of assets reused and refurbished and ultimately recycled, and the various carbon impacts of that activity. It's been a great tool in terms of educating our customers around the power of reuse over recycling. I think I might have mentioned it already. Reuse is 25 times more carbon efficient than recycling. So recycling is better than landfill for sure. Reuse is even better. So, evangelizing on that and ultimately, getting our customers to understand that is hugely important. Reason why it's hugely important is because it has such a dramatic effect on the carbon footprint. And internally at Quantum, we have now measured our own carbon impacts and are in the process of formulating a goal that we will publicly announce to be carbon neutral by X date. We recognize that our Scope 1 and 2 are our customers' Scope 3, and ultimately the expectation is going to be on us to have that number as low as possible because it's going to directly impact your ability to meet your targets.
Right, and it's essentially, we're all partners in this. As you say, the more that we can reduce our emissions at Quantum, the better it is for a Rogers. And we need to understand these interlinkages. Right?
100%.
So believe it or not, we're almost out of time. We've talked about lots of themes around communication and thinking ahead and being, coming to your customers with solutions. But if we had to drill it down into one piece of advice, because we always finish this podcast with one piece of advice, Wayne, what would your piece of advice be to either suppliers or other companies like yourselves?
I think it's anybody. I mean, I coined the phrase that I said one time is that, for our children, we have a world of world's work to do. And I think everyone has to understand their effect on the environment. I mean, Rogers looks at it, what do we put in the marketplace? We're grander than that. We looked at how we affect it in every way, whether it be our employees driving to work or the Blue Jays. And Blue Jays get kicked out, our emissions go down. Good thing, bad thing, right? But, I think it's a matter of, listen to your customers, listen to what we're asking. Listen, and if your customer's not asking you about your scope emissions or your targeting, ask them what they need.
Yeah.
Go to them. Don't wait for them to say, like you said, I need that information now.
Yeah.
Go to them so you're prepared.
That's a good point.
Ask them what they need. Great advice. Clayton, what would your one piece of advice be?
Your vendors are thinking about your business an awful lot. They want to deliver more services to you, and they want to grow their own businesses. So, use them as the subject matter experts they are, but more importantly, use them as partners and not as order takers. The key in a vendor relationship is the word relationship, not vendor. So that would be my advice.
Relationship, great. Well, thank you so much. That was so insightful, and I know I learned a lot. So appreciate having you on and taking this brave step of doing this live.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Wayne.
Excellent. Thank you, Ben.